Loch Ness Monster exists in Supernatural? Discuss.
I wish. Supernatural International Edition.
Hello and welcome to Super Hell, aka the Mystery Spotcast, a show where two recovering Supernatural fans subject themselves to a rewatch. We hope you had a wonderful Destiel anniversary last week. I'm Klaudia. My pronouns are she, her. You can find me on social media at Klaudia Says, K-A-L-U-D-I-A Says.
And I am Ollie. I use any pronouns. My social media is at Ollie Fresh on pretty much every social media platform. It's Fresh with a PH. And oh boy, do we have an episode for you today. We're probably going to do 2 episodes, an episode of the Mystery Spotcast. It makes sense, especially with ones that aren't like super dense, like season finales. We'll probably do like 1 episode of, or like anything that's super, super plot heavy. But we found that like some episodes we just don't have as much to say about. So yeah, this week we're going to do 2 episodes. We're doing episode 2, which shall remain nameless, and episode 3, Dead in the Water. So yeah, if you're actually rewatching with us, sorry. But yeah, you want to watch those 2 episodes before. If not, welcome back to Super Hell.
Yeah, so to begin talking about so episode 2, I'm going to call Wendy Boys because there are certain kinds of beings that you just shouldn't say the name of out loud, or just people tend not to because it's just attracts that kind of attention, and they're maybe from a culture that is not yours. So people have different, ways of addressing that. So we will be calling them various names. The name of this episode, we will be calling it them various names of the monster that is present in this episode.
If you want to look it up, like you can find it on like the IMDb or the wiki or like wherever the show is. It's just, this is a symptom of not only Supernatural, like especially Supernatural, but also a lot of Western media is taking practices and just general things from indigenous cultures and turning it into like a monster or a like cool cryptid or like scary spooky myth, when in reality it is not that same context. Like this monster is in no way, shape, or form in the same realm as like Bigfoot or Mothman or anything, and a lot of people like to contextualize it that way, which is extremely disrespectful, but it happens a lot in Western media, so it's it's super unfortunate, but we're choosing to treat it with more respect than Eric Kripke does,
which is a running theme. I feel like it's a good introduction to some of the problems that we will encounter in this show. They really hit you with it head on with this episode is a combination of really interesting characterization for Sam and Dean, like after the stuff in the pilot, and then just like rampant problematic bullshit for the rest of the episode. So you're like, and that's pretty much a summary of the entire show. So
yeah. And I mean, like, that's what's weird too. We'll talk about it as we get into it, but what's really weird is like there's certain stuff that they get like accurate about the story of this creature, but they still do it in like the weirdly disrespectful way, and it's like how like pick a side. Are you gonna be bad, or are you gonna try to actually do your research? Like what is the answer? I don't understand, but we'll get into it.
It's like how they are both gay and homophobic. Like it's the paradox of Supernatural.
Something that I want to say is what's very funny. The episode starts with like a 2-minute long here's what you missed last week, and it just is summarizing the first episode, and it's so dramatic. Like it has like words on the screen. It's like 2 brothers coming back to find what happened to their mother 22 years ago, interspersed with cuts of the first episode.
Well, to be fair, like this was a new show on broadcast TV that maybe you hadn't recorded it or whatever, and so like if you caught this or what, like it's actually, it was a good marketing strategy. Like they had to be like, all right, it's a new show. Maybe people didn't catch the first episode and they don't know what it's about. Whatever. We don't have social media. I mean, like there's
That
some
is
social
true.
media, but like it's very like we know that not everybody has caught the first episode. Whatever. Like that people have to know what's what. I mean, here's what you missed on Glee. And then if that kind of becomes like a big feature of Supernatural, like the road so far montages are a part of the deal. So it's kind of the beginning of an era, to be fair.
Yeah, that is true. No, it's just I would definitely recommend if you are not rewatching with us, just if you go on Netflix or whatever website that has it, just watch like the first like 2 minutes just because it's extremely funny. Like for the time it wasn't really, but for now where we can just like look up what happened, it's very powerful. Also speaking of here's what you missed on Glee. But when I turned this on, the episode starts with the episode cold open, which is before the like title of the show pops up. It starts with these like three guys who are camping. Two guys are like playing some sort of competitive game on their Nintendo DS's together.
Very powerful, extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Timeless.
And one of these gentlemen is Corey Monteith, the star of Glee. So I did see him and I was like, oh, Corey, you're here.
It was a lot. I've only rewatched this. I think I showed like the first 3 seasons of this show to a friend of mine in college after I had initially watched it. So I have only rewatched it once. But again, I did have the Corey Monteith kind of moment.
I was like, bestie, get out of here. So we see these two gentlemen playing with their Nintendo DS's. Then we cut to this other gentleman who is recording on his cell phone a video that's like, hey, Haley, we're still out camping in Blackridge or on Blackwater Ridge, having a great time. See you soon. Keep you updated. Goodbye. And then he turns off the video.
The fuck? Is it a flip phone?
It's not a flip phone, but it's like one of those like phones that still had the buttons. It was really chunky, but it wasn't a flip phone.
It was like a satellite phone.
It was a satellite phone. Yes. So then there's like this sort of moment where all 3 of these special little guys get taken. There's a monster, perhaps a bear, maybe. We don't see it. It's just shadows and it moves very fast. And Corey Monteith walks into the guy who was recording's little tent and he's like, hey, dude, something's wrong. And then he gets just absolutely snatched away. Then we get the dramatic orchestral beat and then it's the title screen. It's like Supernatural. And I'm like, yeah, it was pretty Supernatural.
I do have to say the cold opens on Supernatural are always just a time you go like, wow, I do love a procedural.
Yeah, no, I will say like as much as we're making fun of it, it was very good. Like it definitely set the tone. This is my problem. Despite the issues that this episode has, it's actually like very enjoyable.
It's well, that's the whole damn show.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But so yeah, Sam and Dean, they basically go there because it's one of the coordinates in their father's journal from the last episode. So they're like, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? The way that it starts is with Sam actually going to Jess's grave and kind of going all out, crying at her grave, like the whole deal. And what I didn't know was that they are in Palo Alto.
Oh my god.
And this just made me feel like if Sam had gone to law school there as well, that would have been like corporate tech lawyer Sam Winchester.
I still think about like POV, you're at a college party and Sam Winchester approaches you to talk about NFTs.
Sam does have his Anakin Skywalker kind of dream.
Oh my god, it is literally an Anakin Skywalker dream where like
oh, my wife keeps dying.
he's at Jess's grave and he's like crying, and then he leans down and he's like, I'm so sorry, I should have told you, I should have protected you. And he reaches down to put some flowers down and an arm shoots out from the grave, and then he wakes up and he's sitting in the passenger seat of the car and Dean's driving. He's like, hey, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. I would just like to find Dad so that we can find the thing that killed my girlfriend. And Dean's like, do you want to drive? Like, would that help maybe take your mind off things? And Sam's like, you never let me drive before. And in my head, when Sam said that, I was like, yeah, probably because like the last time he really was hanging out with Dean, he was between the ages of like 16 and 18. So like, yeah, I probably wouldn't have let my teenage brother drive my vintage car either.
To be fair, John probably did make Dean drive when he was like 12.
That is
So
true.
like, you drive.
The idea of Dean Winchester getting arrested for like traffic violations as opposed to like the actual like illegal stuff he's doing, like carrying like unregistered weapons and that sort of thing, is very funny. It's very much getting Al Capone on tax like on tax law. But yeah, so they are driving to Blackwater Ridge in Colorado, which for your reference is in like sort of like western Colorado. They go to Sam is looking at the map and he's like, it's really weird, there's literally nothing here. So Dean's like, well, maybe Dad's like waiting for us or something, because Dad wanted us to go to these coordinates, it's in his journal. So they go to like the park ranger station that's like near these coordinates, and they go in and they're looking at the map, and a park ranger Wilkinson approaches them and is like, hey, can I help you guys? And they're like, we're college students from UC Boulder, and we're doing a paper.
Environmental studies.
Yeah, we're environmental studies majors from UC Boulder, and we're here to do a paper. And the park ranger's immediately like, that is not true. And he's like,
POV, you are in an environmental studies class with Jensen Ackles. Jared Padalecki.
I'm like, the idea, I'm so sorry. No offense to Jensen Ackles, this is not about him, but the idea of Dean Winchester writing an essay is extremely funny to me. As someone who's written many essays in my life, the idea of him being like, hey, Sammy, what's my thesis statement, is very funny.
The funny part is like, that is something that Sam would say.
Yeah.
Like, can you even read? I'm sorry to the Dean stands listening to this for me calling him stupid. He's not stupid. He's got street smarts.
Also, I will say, as someone who does unfortunately unironically stand Dean Winchester, as horrible as he can be and as much of a misogynist as he is, he's just a funky little guy. And this episode really does show that. Okay, but he's little to me. So yeah, so the park ranger's like, you guys are not in college, I can tell, which is very funny. But he's like, you guys must be friend of Haley, because she won't stop calling. And Dean's like, yes, we are friends of Haley. Wow, yeah. And he's like, yeah, well, like, here's her brother's park permit. Like, he's permitted to be here camping for another couple days. She keeps calling, asking like something's wrong, like he's missing, but I can't report it because he's not supposed to be back for another couple days. So yeah. And Dean's like, can we see the like his, what did he call it? His like registration, I guess, that he's going to be out for the next couple days so that we can show it to his sister so she stops worrying. And the park ranger's like, yeah, sure. Which is very funny because I don't think he's allowed to just give out documentation like that, but c'est la vie. So this
is what you start to realize in the first season of Supernatural is that actually a lot of this does make sense because they are two white guys, and white guys who talk to white guys, they do just get things. Yeah, because like sometimes you're like, how the fuck, and then you're like, wait a minute, that just does happen.
Yeah. So so they get this paper and it shows that Tommy Collins, the name of this special little guy, it says that he's not supposed to be back for like a couple of days and that he and his friends are out camping in the park. So he's like, oh, okay. well, let's go talk to his sister because maybe she has an idea of what's going on. And while they're going there to go to this, Haley Collins is the name of the sister. While they're on their way to Haley's house, Sam and Dean have this little confrontation where Sam is like, why are we even doing this? Dad's probably not even here. And Dean's like, because we want to help people. Like, obviously something's going on here. Dad would probably want us to like help people and like do the right thing. Dean does have a little moment where he's like, okay, I know I was kind of a silly, goofy boy in the first episode who didn't show a lot of regard for others, but like, I actually do care about other people. So Sam, maybe you can chill with the revenge plot you're on. I know you're sad about Jess. Me too. I want to find Dad, but calm down.
To be fair to Sam, it's not that he eventually does become a demon in the vessel for Lucifer. It is because he lived in Palo Alto for so long and was going to become a tech bro, and that's kind of the same thing. So I feel like that's why he has no regard for human life.
Tech bro Sam Winchester does like deeply change how I view his character. But so they're driving and they're having this little headbutting moment. They go to this woman's house and she's a beautiful young woman. And they're like, hey girl, is your sister missing? And oh my God, so sorry, I just misgendered Tommy Collins.
They're like, oh my God, trans Tommy Collins, congrats.
I hate you. So it's like, oh, is your brother missing? And she's like, yeah, my brother's missing. He usually checks in via phone like every day at least, and he stopped sending videos about like 3 days ago, and he has a satellite phone, so he should have been able to contact me, so there's no reason he wouldn't have service. And she informs them that they have hired a guide who's going to take them into the park to go try to find him. So they leave and they're like, well, something's going on with Tommy. So they decide to do a little bit of research, which is always like a fun portion of this show when they do the research. They find out that people go missing in Blackwater in the park at regular intervals every 23 years. They also see the video that Tommy had sent Haley, his sister. She had sent it to them because they were like, hey, just so like, we're park rangers. They said that they were from park rangers, which is why she let them in, which is funny. They had fake IDs and everything. It was very cute. So they decided to go do some research. Earlier, they had told Haley that they were from the Park Service, and that's why they were visiting her. So she sent them some videos that her brother had sent, and she sent them the last one that he had sent, which was the one that we know, the viewer, was the one he had recorded right before he and his friends got taken by the monster. But they watch the video. They find out that there's something in the background going really, really fast, like behind the tent. And they're like, well, that's probably not a bear. A bear cannot go that fast, probably.
Computer enhance.
Yeah, it literally is a computer enhanced moment. They also find out that people go missing in Blackwater at regular intervals every 23 years. So that's like their buzz numbers. Like, okay, every 23 years, a bunch of people go missing in this area. And there's something in the background of this video going real fast. They look up the last.
Oh my God, it's Sonic the Hedgehog.
No, not Sonic. That's what I'm calling the monster in this episode.
No, it's Shadow. It's Shadow.
It literally is Shadow because it is a big shadow behind the tent that they see going really fast. They're like, oh no,
Knuckles.
It's the ultimate life form. So they look up the last instance of like this attack, and they find out that there was a guy who survived. Like, he was a child when it happened, but it happened in 1958. So they go visit this old man, and they're like, hey, so what happened when you guys got attacked by quote unquote a bear and no one else survived except for you? And he's like, yeah, my parents died. Literally everyone died. It was absolutely not a bear. Whatever the creature was, it didn't like break down the door of the cabin we were staying in. It like unlocked the cabin door and then made a noise like nothing I've ever heard before. Definitely not a bear. He does specifically say that it moved like lightning fast. It's a little spooky. So yeah, that's kind of what they know before really going into their main mission.
Yeah, and then they head into the woods and they meet the sisters party basically in the woods, right?
So they like yeah, they pull up to go to the park to go and be like, okay, let's figure out what has happened. They roll up like to the entrance, and Haley, the sister, Ben, who's the little brother of Haley and Tommy, Tommy is the one who's missing, and their guide, whose name is Roy, and they're setting out to go find Tommy's campsite. Um, and Sam and Dean are like, hey, besties, we're gonna come too. And the guide is like, hey, who are you? And they're like, and Haley's like, they're park rangers. They're the only ones the ranger service has to offer. And they're like, yep, we're coming with you. And there's an extremely funny line where Haley's like, you guys are going to be like coming with us in jeans and biker boots. Like, that's what your guys are going to wear to like hike. And she's like, what about provisions? You guys don't have any supplies? And he's like, yeah, I do. And he has a bag of peanut M&Ms that he's eating. It's so funny because he's like, yeah, don't worry. I'm not going to starve on the trail. I have peanut M&Ms.
That's honestly me though. When someone's
Yeah.
like, "Have you eaten today?" and I'm like, "I ate a piece of bread."
Yeah. It's like, oh, have you eaten today? I'm like, I had a Rice Krispie treat for breakfast. So I'm basically good. That's Dean Winchester core. Ugh, yes, my mentally ill king.
She really does like clock them immediately.
Yeah, I'm like, girl, you've got to know something's up. I really actually do like Haley a lot. This is a thing that happens a lot in this part of the show, is that the side characters are, and like not necessarily the side characters, I don't know what you would call them, like the one episode like plot heavy characters are really interesting and like quite good at acting.
They're very realistic of like, I don't that doesn't make any sense. Like,
Yeah. And she had also established earlier that like their parents are gone. It's just her and her brothers. So it's very like she does portray like the head of house very well because she's like, I
she's
don't
girl
care.
bossing.
She is a girl boss. She's like, I just want to find my brother. I don't care what anyone else has to say. Um, so they go to the campsite and it's totally destroyed. Their tents are ripped, their equipment's damaged. It's
Oh no,
all
our campsite. It's broken.
literally that's what happened. Like they walk up and there's like blood everywhere, and it's like, oh my god, Tommy. And I was like, I hope Tommy's not dead. It's been like 20 minutes since the beginning of the show. I don't even remember if he survived. Um, and then they hear a scream, and there's a guy, and he's like, help me, help. Our table is broken. No, he doesn't say that, but he,
It literally does kind of sound like that though.
oh no, help, I'm broken. But so then Sam and Dean uh run after whatever the person screaming was, and Roy runs after with them, and um Haley and Ben run too. And there's no one there, and they're like, oh, that was weird. So they go back to the campsite, and their packs have been taken, like their backpacks and stuff, their supplies. And Roy, who's their guide, is like, no, not my, they've taken my satellite phone. Now I'm not going to be able to get in contact with anyone. Um, Happy to know he had a satellite phone. They talk about that a lot in this episode.
And they were really trying to cover their bases of like plot holes. They were like, this is gonna be tight. Like you can't tell us there was another way for them to solve this.
Yeah, they're like, there's nothing wrong with this episode. It's gonna be airtight.
Well, oopsies.
So then with the help of their father's journal, they realize that they are facing this monster that we do not want to say the name of.
Does Sam? So Sam, like, after they hear the voice, whatever. what they're like he's like, Dean, can I like talk to you for a second? And they like go off on their own, right? So yeah, they go off to the side, whatever, and Sam is like, I've connected the dots, and he's flipping through whatever, and he's like, okay, so I think we're facing a Wendy boy, etc., etc., and so what we brought with us, I think they brought like silver bullets and stuff like that. I don't think that's gonna help at all. And Dean's like, fuck. And then Dean's like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, they usually are more south of here, whatever. And this is where we get into a bit of a problem.
Yeah, because Dean's like, so the myth of this guy, and this is actually true, like with the real life, like stories about this creature, are that it generally appears in like Midwest, like northern areas. So he specifically says like Minnesota and northern Michigan, because
and Canada also.
Yeah, and Canada, because that's where like the indigenous stories of this thing come from. So that is actually like somewhat accurate. And then they're like, oh, and it can mimic a human voice. So that's like, those are like two big things from this guy. So they are like, oh, we have figured out what it is. This Wendy boy can mimic human voices. It runs really fast. It is a person who became a cannibal to survive, and the more they ate, the closer they became to this creature, and they had to eat human meat, and they become insatiably hungry, and they can keep victims alive so that they have something to feed on, and they feed every 23 years. So it's interesting because some of this stuff is accurate to the actual story of these creatures, and some of it is like, is it though? But while they're doing this, Sam is kind of like, I don't really understand. This is ridiculous. Dad's obviously not here. And Dean says his fun little line.
This is the line that you've probably seen a million gifs of, whatever, where he's like, you know, saving people, hunting things, the family business. And it's just so hateful that this is in this episode.
Yeah, it's like this deep thing of Dean, and it's also Dean's like characterization as like actually like, the big brother who's like, hey Sam, like I know you're facing trouble, as I know you're upset, but like this is the right thing to do. And this is not only what Dad would want us to do, but it's like it's what we should do, is like, we're gonna save people, we're saving people, hunting things, the family business. So then they go back to the group and are like, okay, in order to protect everyone, we're going to draw Anasazi symbols around the campground. And for those of you who don't know, the Anasazi are an indigenous group that was from like the Four Corners region of the United States. So it's like southeastern Utah, northeastern Arizona, northwestern Mexico, and southwestern Colorado. So like a little bit, it almost makes sense for it to be in this area, but this area, like,
but not with this
with the like
creature. It's all, they were just like, we're mixing and matching. It was like,
yeah,
uh-oh.
This creature is not a part of Anasazi legend.
No, it's Anishinaabe. So
yeah, so great. Bad. They draw symbols on the ground around the campsite, and they're like, okay, let's make camp here. These will protect us during the night, so nothing is going to get us. It's
basically a bad plot device.
Oh,
They use it the same way. I mean, and this is kind of a part of the problem, like when they copy and paste things from cultures they do not understand. It's the same thing that they do when they're like, oh, I'm going to do a circle of salt to keep out the ghosts or whatever. It's like, no, it's not all the same. Like, stop. Like, they just mix and match.
It's also one of those things where like you could have just said like, oh, we're going to draw some symbols of protection. Like, you didn't have to specify that it was Anasazi. Like, it's...
Yeah. You could have just
Anyway,
been like, oh, like dad, dad
this
always has some stuff in his book that will get it. Like, you didn't have to, all
yeah, you
right, fine.
have dad's journal right there. You could have just said like, oh, this was in dad's journal about protecting from it. Anyway, um, while they're with the group, they're like, hey guys, here's what's happening. And Haley and Ben are like, that's ridiculous, but like obviously, I guess you know more than we do, and something weird's out here. And Roy, who's the guide, is like, you guys are so stupid. This is not real. This is ridiculous. And he's like, oh, okay, the simples are gonna protect us, whatever. Just like being like the epitome of like the skeptic in a weird like scary movie. Then once again, they hear someone being like, help me, in the woods. And Dean and Sam are like, oh my God, everyone stay in the campsite, stay behind the symbols, don't go. And Roy's like, somebody needs help. And he leaves. And they're like, Roy, no. So they run after Roy. And Roy gets like pulled up into a tree and maimed and disappears. And they're like, okay, well, and then they run back and or stay in the campsite.
Yeah, it's very traditional horror movie where people are getting like picked off one by one.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it's the next day where they're like, hey, so monsters are real. They do the monsters are real
Yeah.
talk, which they don't do often on the show. They have to do it sometimes. Like, I think the rule on this show is very much like they try not to do the, hey, monsters are real, talk with people unless the people themselves have like seen it and are
Yeah.
kind of starting to lose it. Because otherwise they're like, yeah, that's gonna be a lot for somebody. So
Yeah.
they do have the talk, I believe, with Haley, whatever.
Yeah.
And this is when they're like, oh, Wendy boy means evil that devours, and this is what they are, and whatever. And then Dean has a very weird sentence that he says that I do not like. He's like, yeah, they could have been a prospector or a miner or an Indian. You're like, I'm sorry, and a what?
Yeah.
Dean?
I'm like,
Hello?
I know this came out in 2005, but like
No.
that was
Bad.
not that was not good. It's one
The
of those
1950s? Jesus.
yeah, it's one of those things too where I'm like, okay, I realize that I keep being like, oh, it was like a quote unquote different time. It was 2005. It was not that long ago, but it's still just like, dude, come on. Anyway, so he says that, and Haley is like, I don't know how I feel about that. Also, like that thing is pretty powerful. I am very upset. And Dean's like, hey, Tommy could still be alive. Like they hibernate, they store their food. So we might be able to follow the trail. But the only way to kill it is if we set it on fire. And she's like, okay, well, I don't want to leave without my brother, so let's figure out what's going on.
Yeah,
So
he does arm himself with Molotov cocktails.
yeah, I'm like, okay, like, all right, King, like, let's go. So they are like,
Anarchist Dean Winchester.
dang, he said ACAB in the earlier episode, and now he's an anarchist. He is truly, it's impossible to understand this man. So they get their Molotov cocktails and they go to follow the monster's trail because they're like, okay, it left behind this bloody trail. And it took Roy, so maybe we can try to figure out where it took him. So they go to follow the trail with their Molotov cocktails, and Roy's dead body just fall from a tree. And they're like, oh my God, Roy's dead. And Haley's like,
Like,
okay, well,
I could have dropped my croissant.
yeah. And Haley's like, okay, well, Roy is dead. I don't like that. And he's like, well, Tommy could still be alive. And then the Wendy boy appears, causes everyone to scatter, and captures Haley and Dean. So Sam and Ben, who's the brother, are like, oh my God, what do we do? And they find a trail of peanut M&Ms that Dean left behind for them to follow, the peanut M&Ms that he had brought with him into the forest earlier. So they have to, it's very Hansel and Gretel. So yeah, so they follow this trail of little of Pennut Nums, and they find Dean and Haley and Tommy hanging from the ceiling of an abandoned mine. And they cut them loose and they're like, oh my God, are you guys okay? Also, Sam does have this like epic moment with teen brother Ben, who's just a little guy who's like, I don't know what to do. And Sam's like, okay, we got this, bestie. And it's very sweet.
Well, because the whole episode, if you haven't caught on yet, is supposed to be like a metaphor for like, I'm just trying to find my brother, just like Sam is. It's like it's very heavy handed, but you're like, all right, oh, we get it. Because he's like, oh, the younger brother is going to find the older brother, and you're like, okay, all right, thank you, Eric.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. As if we couldn't understand. Um, so we find them. They cut Dean and Haley down and they find their stolen supplies. And Dean's like, oh, great, there's 2 flare guns in here. You guys take, he's like, Sam, you take all of our fun little normal people besties out, and I'm gonna explode the bad guy. And as they're leaving, the Wendy boy does follow Sam and corners the group, but then Dean shows up behind and shoots his flare gun at it, and it bursts into flames and basically explodes. And then they're like, okay, let's leave. Then they get back like topside and they go back to like society, and we see a scene of like the police and like of an ambulance, and it's like a clip of the camera just kind of like going through this scene, and we see little brother Ben being like, it was the biggest grizzly bear ever that attacked. It was like 800 pounds. It was huge. So they made up this story about it being a bear. Yeah. And then Haley's like, hey, Dean, thanks for helping me save my brother. And Dean's like, yeah, girl, yeah, baby girl, I don't mind. I'm happy to do it. It was much more sincere than that.
This is what begins a long string of Dean flirts with the girl of the week, and it's like, honey, you are gay.
Yeah, like I hate to tell you this, but you're experiencing compet.
Like he is bisexual for sure, but also like you are overcompensating so much. Like,
yeah. To be fair though, in this episode, you do actually like learn to love Dean, because I think in the first episode he's kind of like a shithead, but like on purpose. Like that's the point. But in this episode, he's actually just like, he's like a big brother who's like, we got it figured out. Don't worry, we're gonna do it. But then he's like, hey, woman.
He's like, how do you do, fellow heterosexual?
so then Haley's like, okay, I'm leaving. I'm gonna go into the ambulance with Tommy and we're gonna go to the hospital. Thanks for helping me save my brother. Goodbye. And then she leaves and Dean's like, dang, I hate camping. Sam, let's find our dad. We're gonna find him. Like, it's gonna be okay. We're gonna find him. We're gonna find the thing that killed Jess. Like, you're all good. And Sam's like, yeah, you're right. No, I thought about it. And like, we should help people while we look for dad. It's, it's the best thing for us to do. But in the meantime, I'm driving. And Dean's like, ho, just like I said earlier in the episode. And then the show ends.
It is also like, thus begins. We say we don't talk about our feelings, yet every episode we talk about our feelings either leaning up against the car or in the car.
Yeah.
And we have the same conversation for 15 seasons. So it's very funny to watch where they're like, he's like, yeah, I guess, I thought about it. And I'm like, instead of going to kill a Wendy boy in the woods, you could just go to therapy, but...
Yeah, I'm like, look, you did do a good job in saving people, but like, maybe take a nap, drink some water, talk to someone.
This would be such a good episode if they just used a different creature.
They literally, also, there were no moments in this episode where I was like, that has to be this. Like, they could have just said, oh, it's a weird monster that eats people. It's so weird and disrespectful, but the episode is good. Question mark. Like
Yeah.
it has a lot of really interesting themes, and like again, it's really the first episode where we get into like the real like monster of the week stuff, and we see Dean being a big brother. And like the other episode we're going to talk about too has a lot of like really epic Dean moments. And I'm just like, I wish this episode was not like this.
It's also, I think it's also a product of not just its time, but of like we were talking about earlier of like how Western or oppressor cultures in general use certain, like there are certain stories and certain creatures and whatever that like a lot of horror will use, or like that, so it probably, people be like, oh, didn't need to do it on purpose. Like there's a lot of shows that'll do or movies that'll do something about a Wendy boy or whatever. And like, yeah, it's so ingrained into Western popular culture to use specific monsters that like they're like, oh, we're making a supernatural show that takes place in, you know, the wilderness of the United States. We must include these monsters. There's a piece in, when I was researching a little bit about this actual creature and story about it, of like how there is a dissonance between what this creature means now that it has been taken by settlers and made into something else, versus the other version of it. The version that is the bastardized version represents a lot of like greed and, you know, colonialism and stuff like that. We did go with, oh, it's a scary monster that does eat people. When sometimes there can be a deeper meaning to it.
Deeper meaning in Supernatural?
No. So the second episode, which is the third episode of Supernatural, is called Dead in the Water. And this one is actually a pretty classic episode. This one is, I remember this was like one of my favorite like early on episodes. Very emblematic of when this show is like really good and in its formula.
Yeah. I will add, this episode is really, really, really good. Like after this episode was over, like I was like, dang, maybe I do like this show, because the acting is superb. Like not only from Jared and Jensen, but also from like all of the other characters in this episode. Like it's so enjoyable. And it was also written by two women.
Yeah, and I believe one of them went on to create The Magicians. This episode also, I believe when I watched it the first time, this was the one where I was like, I kind of like this show, which is hateful. But this is also the episode where I remembered, oh, I forgot this show is scary, because I remember when I'm not a horror person. So when Super Hulock was popular, I waited a really long time to watch Supernatural, because I was like, oh, it's scary. Like, I don't want to watch it. So, like, when I watched the first couple seasons, when I was watching it, I was like, oh, I'm legitimately scared. And now looking back, I'm like, no, it's the stupid Campy Angel show, whatever. And now I'm like, oh, the first couple seasons, there are legitimately scary things in this show. They did. Oh, and this episode specifically did freak me out. I do have a fear of open water, lakes with dark water, whatever, and that is exactly what this episode is about. So this is my worst nightmare. So I was like, oh, this show is scary. But this episode also has what we liked about the previous one, which has good characterization. The last one is like, oh, I'm a brother, or I'm a sibling, and I'm going to look for my sibling, or I'm going to look for my father, kind of a Sam situation, although we get a lot of Dean. And this is very much a Dean-centric episode. So
yeah, they really realized, they were like, we made Dean look kind of too annoying in the first episode. We need to make him a bit more likable. Yeah.
It's very this other piece of this episode is very much of like a whodunit also. Like there are some that are very like monster of the week, whatever. Monster of the week, and we're figuring out the thing, a puzzle, if you will, or we're learning something about a new monster or whatever. This is a whodunit. some of the best Supernatural episodes, I think, are the ones where it's like, maybe the humans were the monster.
No, I agree completely. I also think there's something very funny about being like in this world where it's not just funny, it's also like it's basic, but it can be very poignant depending on how well you do it, of being like in a world where there are supernatural elements and there are legitimate like monsters and demons and that sort of thing. The thing that creates everything is man. I just think it's done really well, especially in this episode. At the end of this episode, you do feel like bad. And not bad in like a bad way. Not like, oh, I wish I didn't watch that. But you're like, oh, this felt extremely real.
Yeah, you're like, wow, this is fucking sad.
So the cold open in this episode,
oh my god, the girl in the fucking house that looks like it's like a set.
So there's this girl and she wakes up and she comes downstairs and she's like, good morning, daddy. And she like gives her dad a little kiss on the cheek, and he's sitting at the table reading his paper or whatever he's doing. And her brother's like, oh, you're always working out. Dudes don't like buff chicks. And she's like, well, girls don't like dudes who live at home. And
it's
then
very powerful.
Yeah, then he kind of laughs at her and they laugh, and it's clearly like, oh, it's the dad, the brother, and the daughter, and they have this nice little relationship. Then she goes down to like the pier on this lake and she dives in and she's just like swimming around. And then she just gets totally dragged underwater. And then it's like, supernatural. Here's the title screen.
And you're like, you're like, this is my worst fear. It's very, very scary.
I don't know. I'm not like, my fear, I watch a decent amount of horror. I don't get scared very easily by this kind of stuff. So I was not like scared, but I was deeply troubled. Like it was a very like suspenseful, well-written like scene. And what's also really nice too is like there is music, but there's not a lot of music in this episode.
Yeah.
Like a lot of like score. A lot of it is just like the sound of water. And I feel like that is very, very spooky.
Yeah. So do Sam and Dean, is this another one that's in the journal, or they just like find this one like in the newspaper or something? I can't remember.
Yeah, so they're at like a bar. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So they're at a bar and this girl walks up and she's the waitress is like, can I get you anything else? And her whole like boobs are out. And Dean's like, and Sam's like, no, just the check, please.
It's also very funny to me to see the evolution of Dean's taste.
I do also like Dean being like, look at girls' butt. That's what men do, right? He's very much choosing to be attracted to this woman. No, but I digress. Sam is like, well, just take the check, please. And he's like, Sam, we're allowed to have fun. And Sam's like, okay, whatever.
Sam's like, this woman is at work.
So then Dean puts down a paper and he's like, all right, dude, calm down. Look, here, like, this is the third drowning victim in the last year whose body hasn't been recovered from the lake.
You get the classic Sam, so get this, which is how pretty much every episode starts, with Sam being like, so I was doing some research.
But Dean is the one who found this one.
Yeah, that's true.
He's the smart guy.
Yeah, I mean, they're both actually quite good at research. Later on, it becomes that Sam is like the tech guy, but they're both really good at research and like basically spotting patterns that are kind of off so that you could go check it out and see if it's a supernatural phenomenon.
Oh my god, just like the show, Supernatural.
Get the fuck out. So this is when they also pose as federal wildlife officers in this one. Again, they are not dressed up. They're just wearing their normal fucking clothes, and they're in their mid-20s. At this point, Dean is younger than me.
And Sam is he's tall, so I think he has tall boy privilege, but
they both are. They both are. I mean,
yeah, but Sam is, but there's a problem. Standing next to Sam, Dean does not look that tall.
Well, this is a general supernatural problem because Dean, Sam, and Castiel are all incredibly tall people. But
yeah.
Because Dean and Sam are both extremely tall, like your perspective there's like a forced perspective hobbit situation going on Supernatural all the time.
No,
like
truly. Because that's the thing. I think Jared Padalecki's 6'4", Jensen Ackles is 6'2", and Misha Collins is 6'1". So all of these men are over
Misha
6 feet
Collins
tall.
looks small.
But anyway, so also literally everyone they interact with looks very tiny. But so
yeah, so they show up as federal wildlife officers. This also starts a trend of when they try to pretend to be people. Usually, I feel like they try to match it up with their fake IDs, but I don't know if they had fake IDs this time. They were just like, "Hi, we're Agents Hamill and Ford." Epic Star Wars reference.
Which is also extremely funny because it has been said by, I believe Eric Kripke did say that he based Sam and Dean off of Dean as Han Solo and Sam as Luke Skywalker.
Sorry, small twink Luke Skywalker as Sam Winchester is quite possibly makes me feel insane. Those characters aren't like each other at all.
Oh my god. I mean, I do also like the idea of Luke Skywalker going to college because canonically he does want to go to school.
He does.
It does kind of make sense.
It is true. He does want to go to school, and then everything gets kind of blown up.
Everything gets caught on fire. Oh my god. Also, I do think it's very funny the idea of Dean as Obi-Wan.
Han Solo, Dad's been on a hunting trip for a few days.
Han Solo's like, Alderaan's been on a hunting trip for a few days.
No, that's Leia. Vader's been on a hunting trip for a few days.
Oh my god.
Also,
hey, wait, does this make Bobby Obi-Wan?
Get the fuck out. So yeah, anyways, they introduce them. This is also a trend that Supernatural does, where they have increasingly funny names that they use for themselves. They're often music based because Dean is like into classic rock. So they're often music based. So this is one of the few times that I think that they're actors or whatever. I know one time, didn't they do like Bowie and Mercury at one point? Like,
I'm pretty sure like they do stuff that's like any normal person would be like, excuse me? Like, I know you did not just say that your name was that. Like, it's
very funny, and I did think about it all the time. That is not the plot of the goddamn episode, though. So,
it might as well be.
Like, actually, the plot of this episode is A New Hope. Anyway.
Oh my god.
So, they do go in, and they talk to the sheriff. His name is Jake Devins. And basically, the guy is like, yeah, listen, we've, like, dredged this fucking lake. We've done fucking sonar. We haven't found anything, and the lake is gonna drain anyway because the local dam that basically creates this small lake is leaking anyway. And he's like, you guys should know that because you're in the wildlife service. And they're like, yeah, of course. Like, do we know?
This is one of those situations where I'm like, I really need Sam to be the one who takes the lead because Dean is the most unconvincing liar, and I think he is, like,
he does eventually
in the universe of the show. I guess he's a good liar, but to the watcher, he's like, yep, we absolutely knew about that. And I'm like, hey, bestie, you realize that you look so disingenuous right now. Like, it happens all the time where Dean will say something and I'm like, dude, if I heard someone say that in my real life, I would be like, I need to call the local authorities because you are doing this.
Two white guys. Like, they're
once again, very true.
They're two white guys talking to another white guy who was like, yeah, I'll trust these random I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
They're also tall. They have tall privilege.
Yeah, if we're talking about, like, Sam eventually does have this, and he did this in the first episode. We did talk about this thing of, like, where he starts to talk to people and they start to trust him and they tell him shit. Which is a thing that my dad does a lot.
Oh my god, Claudia Winchester.
No, get me the fuck out of here. Wait, am I the blurry kid?
You're Dean Jr.
No! I'm the blurry child. The reason I joke about this is it is a real thing. So my dad, you know, he has a business, like, as a contractor. He goes to people's places and he fixes things. And so he's, like, in people's houses and he goes all over. And people just tell him shit. And he's like, I didn't ask, number one. And number two, you know, okay, fine, let me start asking you questions. So when we're like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense, I'm like, actually, yeah, it does. Eventually, it does.
I do feel like Sam also has one of those faces that I'm like, yeah, like you don't seem malicious, especially in this episode, because he is supposed to be fully like 22, so he does kind of have a baby face. So you're like, you're not capable of doing nasty things.
Yeah,
you're just a little guy.
Yeah, and also cops are bad at their jobs, so you know what? They will just give information to random people who pretend to be the wildlife service.
Yeah.
So they're in the sheriff's office. He's telling them all this stuff, and then the sheriff's daughter comes in with her son. And once again, we have our traditionally attractive white woman with dark hair on Supernatural wearing a Henley, because this is the mid-2000s.
Also, she's played by Amy Acker, who I am like have been deeply in love with for a while. Like I saw this, I was watching this at maybe like 1 a.m, and when she came on, I was like, oh, Amy! She is such a good actress. She gave her all in this episode.
She really does. And Dean immediately like tries to flirt with her, and she's like, so anyway,
yeah.
And she brings in her son, and I'll talk about this a little bit, but like her son is very much the trope of like small disturbed child who's probably neurodivergent in a horror film, which is also, it's very problematic.
Yeah, it is. It does have like a very, this episode has a really weird relationship with like PTSD and dealing with trauma.
They don't treat it as like, oh, he's some like demon possessed child. They treat it as like, this kid has had something bad happen to him, and like eventually Dean empathizes with him. It's actually not so bad.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, he hasn't talked in a while, whatever. And I'm like, because he's traumatized. And like, oh, that's actually not too bad.
Yeah. So they do say like oh, he's, they are like, oh, can you take us to a hotel? And she's like, yeah.
And she is like, yeah, there's one like 2 blocks away. And he's like, can you walk us there? And she's like, you need me to walk you 2 fucking blocks? And she's like, fine, like whatever.
Yeah.
And so she's like, all right, I'll be back later.
As they're walking there, Dean's like, I love kids. Your kid's great. And she's like, yeah, my kid is traumatized. He has not talked in like literal years.
And then Sam is like, I think the line is, Sam is like, name a child.
No, he says, so Sam says, name 5 children that you know. And I'm like, sir, you're really gatekeeping children.
He said, for $1, name a child.
And Dean's like, why would I know children? I don't know any children.
Dean's like, I don't have any adult friends.
Yeah, he's like, I can't even name an adult that I know other than like you and Dad.
Which is, it's very funny. Also having like seen the whole show, it's very funny because like he does adopt a child.
Oh, but while they're walking home, Andrea's like, yeah, 6 people have disappeared in Lake Manitowoc, which is the lake that we saw the girl drown in the beginning of the episode. Andrea is the mother of the boy Lucas. So Andrea is the daughter of the sheriff. Lucas is the sheriff's grandson and Andrea's son. And he does not talk. And Andrea is like, yeah, it's messed up. So Sam and Dean do their research, and they find out that Lucas saw his dad die, like witnessed his dad die in the lake. And he hasn't talked since.
Yeah, it's very awful. So Sam and Dee decided to go talk to the kid and talk to Andrea. And they find them at a park. And this is where we have like a little bit of an emotional Dean moment. And like, as somebody who has now finished the series and has a lot of emotions about what they did to Dean and whatever, like I did experience a genuine emotion here. Because Dean goes into this whole little speech with Lucas where he's like, hey, I know what it's like to see something that most people don't believe in, and I know what it's like to lose somebody in your family in a really traumatic way, whatever. He's like, hey, kid, actually, we're the same.
Yeah, and like this kid,
he draws him a little picture of his family, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, because so like Lucas and Andrea are like at the park, and they walk up and they're like, hey, Andrea, can we go talk to your kid? And she's like, yeah, sure. So Sam's like sitting with Andrea chatting, and Dean is like talking to Lucas, and Lucas is drawing and like not really acknowledging Dean. And Dean's like, yeah, my mom also died. Here's a picture of my family that I drew for you. And it's like, it's so precious because Dean is just like talking to this kid, and he's like, earlier, he's like, I'm not good with kids. Or Sam's like, you're not good with kids. And then he is like the best with this child. And it's just like,
it's with this specific child because they are trauma bonding.
Yeah, no, literally.
But the thing here is that then, like, because he gives him the picture and he draws it, and then Lucas draws him a picture of a house, and he gives it to Dean, and Andrea's like, this kid hasn't like spoken or acknowledged anybody in a while. Like, damn, that's crazy. Thanks, Dean. And so then we cut to
Bill Carlton is the dad of the girl that drowned in the beginning of the episode.
Okay.
Will Carlton is his son. And basically,
so they were both in the beginning.
Yeah.
So,
earlier, Sam and Dean had gone to Bill Carlton's house. They run into Will. I can't believe their names are Bill and Will.
Yeah.
So Will is the son, and they go and talk to Will, and they're like, hey, can we talk to your dad about your sister drowning? And Will was like, he's really upset. Don't talk to my dad right now. He's really going through it. But he basically tells him like, yeah, my sister drowned. It's really crazy because she like Will is like, I saw something pull her down, but it was dark and I was far away, so I didn't see what. And it kind of feels like no one really believes him. But he's like, yeah, no, she totally knows that lake. Like, she's a varsity swimmer. She's been swimming in that lake her entire life. It's right behind our house. There's no reason that she would have drowned. But obviously their dad is Bill is like really just messed up and heartbroken about it.
Yeah, so then they go, so then right after this like little heartwarming moment, because this is Supernatural, we go to something fucking horrifying.
Yeah.
Which is Will, the son, the brother of the person from the cold open.
He's like, hey dad, like the dad's sitting in front of the TV, just like in a fugue state, totally depressed. He's like, hey dad, do you want something to eat? And dad doesn't respond. So he's like, okay, I'm gonna go make dinner. So he goes to go and make some dinner, and he's like chopping up some fish, and then the sink just starts filling up and the water's all nasty and black, and he goes to like pull the stopper out of the sink, and he pulls it out, and then it doesn't drain. So he's like, the sink is like full up with water. It's like a big basin sink. So he reaches in to go to like try to unclog the drain, I guess, and some force just like pulls him under the water, and he just like drowns in his sink.
This is literally my worst fear. I do live in New York City where we do not have garbage disposals, so I do have to reach in sometimes to get out whatever's, clogging it. So watching this is viscerally fucking terrifying.
No, it's really like genuinely so upsetting. Yeah. It's like, it's also so sad because the dad's like clearly depressed over the loss of his daughter, and that his son also just dies.
Yeah. So basically, then they find out, and Sam tells Dean of like, hey, the guy we just talked to fucking died. And they are like, okay, so whatever is in this lake has to know that this lake is being drained. Like, it has to be like sentient of some kind, and they're like, it's trying to get some sort of revenge, and then it's like it's running out of time to get its revenge. Because the lake is being drained.
And it's also like, because like there have been a couple like situations in the past where there have been deaths, but now it's like really picking up the pace, because it's like, this is something that's not like, oh, it's not a drowning. This is like something was actively like, oh shoot, I gotta put the pedal to the metal.
Me just like procrastinating until the end.
Yeah, but they're like, oh,
it's about drive. It's about this ghost. So It's hustling. So they assume that the father, the one who was really sad, Bill Carlton, has to be involved because it's been targeting his kids and his godson.
While they're doing their research, they find out like Bill Carlton, who's the dad of the two people who have died, Lucas, who's the boy who saw his dad die, is his godson. So whatever this was, intentionally killed Lucas's dad, Andrea's husband, in addition to Bill's kids.
Yeah, it's so they're like, okay, they try to talk to Bill again, nothing. He's like catatonic. I believe this is the scene where they're on the dock and Bill's like, I am literally having one of those moments.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out. It's actually very visceral.
Yeah, he does specifically say to like, losing, I've lost both my children. It's worse than dying. So that's just an important thing to remember for later. Just remember that he says, it's worse than dying.
It's also very hard to watch that scene, just knowing things that happen in Supernatural later. Because you're like, given the number of times that Dean and Sam die and then lose people close to them, this hits different.
It's also just like really sad. Like the acting is really good here, and it's genuinely like, dang, this is a man who's lost everything. It's really, really sad. It's one of the first real episodes of Supernatural where like the characters dying who aren't like the main characters, like it really does like hurt.
You're like, oh, death is bad. No. Basically, they go visit the kid again, and Dean is like, I'm gonna have another therapy session.
Well, so no. First, they find out that what happened with Will was all like Will Carlton, the boy who drowned. The boy, he's an adult. The guy who drowned in the sink. Dean looks at the picture that Lucas gave him earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a drawing of their house.
Yeah. So he's like, oh, wait a minute. I'm connecting the clues, and then Dean tells him his experience with his own mother, and Lucas gives him another picture basically, and there's like a house, and there's like there's with a white church, and there's like a boy, and next to a bicycle. It's like very specific. And so Sam and Dean are like, okay, let's find the church, let's find the house next to it. They visit the woman who lives there. They discover that her son, a guy named Peter, vanished 35 years ago with his bicycle that was in the picture. Ooh. So Dean, when they're in his house, Dean sees a picture of the guy who disappeared, Peter, with Bill Carlton, the guy who's now just lost both of his kids. And then they're like, okay, I think Bill might have killed Peter, and the lake is Peter's vengeful spirit. Shit.
Yeah, so they're like, this is a uh-oh situation. This is one of those situations we like to call bad.
They're like, uh-oh. So they go back to like...
Also, sorry. In this situation, what really makes them connect the dots is when Peter Sweeney's mom, who's now like an older woman, says like, he never came home. Like Peter was supposed to come right home after school with his bike, and he just never did. We just don't even know what happened to him. Losing your child is worse than dying.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing that Bill Carlton said.
Yeah. And
so that's what makes them be like, oh my God, it's trying to like, this thing is trying to make Bill Carlton feel what Peter's mother did, which is bad.
And so they go back to talk to Bill again to be like, hey, what the fuck? And they see Bill like going out into the middle of the lake with a boat, and they're like, and then they see the boat flip over, and Bill immediately goes under the water, and they're like, uh-oh.
Yeah. Then they do like maybe the most like normal thing they do, and go tell the police that someone died, like which is not something they do very often on this show, which is like follow the correct procedures for when bad things happen. But yeah, so they go tell the sheriff.
Well, and this is also a very realistic part too, because this is where the sheriff is like, I have realized you are not federal wildlife officers, you need to get the fuck out, there are people dying. And he's basically like, you have two choices here, I will arrest you because a bunch of people fucking just died, or you can just fucking leave. So what are you gonna do?
While they're leaving the police station, Lucas is there like with his mom because they're coming to visit the grandpa who's the chief of police. And Lucas sees Dean and sees them going to leave and like grabs Dean's arm and is like clearly distressed. And then they're like, okay, come on, let's go. So they leave.
And so at first they leave, and I think they're like halfway out, and then Dean's like, no, we gotta save these people, like we have to turn back, whatever, like. And they sneak back in.
And Sam, while they're driving, Sam is like, I don't understand why we want to go back. Like Bill Carlton, who's the guy who killed Peter, the little boy who died, he's dead. What else is going to happen? And Dean's like, I don't know. I just got a weird feeling. What if he's not? Like, what if there's something else? I just want to make sure. Lucas is really upset. Like, I don't feel like we should leave until we figure out what's going on.
Epic neurodivergent Dean connecting
literally
with a neurodivergent child moment. He's like,
I love that. On. And Sam's like, okay. So they go back. And then we get this like really scary scene, actually.
Again, this episode is terrifying because this is like a classic horror scene situation. Yeah.
Then we cut to the scene at Lucas and Andrea's house. Lucas is just drawing frantically, and Andrea's like, hey, baby, like it's the middle of the night. Why are you up? Let's go to bed. So she puts him to bed, and we see on the ground the picture he's drawing is just like a huge black spiral. It's not really a spiral. It's just like a big black circle that he's just frantically drawing with crayons. And then Andrea's like, puts him to bed.
And she goes to take a bath, and it's like, and then the water fills up, and it's the same like black water from the lake, like it was in the kitchen sink, and it does try to drown her in the bathtub, and like it's Dean and Sam do break into her house, and they do save her. Like Sam pulls her out of the water.
Because they come up to the door to like ring the doorbell to be like, hey, is Lucas all right? And like as soon as they press the doorbell, Lucas is like at the door, and he pulls it open because he like when his mom is drowning, he's like banging on the bathroom door. Then Dean and Sam show up, and he runs downstairs and is like, come help me.
This child gets traumatized again. So Sam like pulls her out of the water, and she's like, I heard a voice in the water that said like, come play with me, which is like so stereotypical.
Yeah.
And then Dean starts like going through her photo albums and whatever, and he finds an old photo. It's a lot of like Dean like going through people's personal shit.
As he should. I feel like if anyone was gonna go through my personal belongings, I'd want it to be Dean Winchester, because I feel like he'd find something important, but all of the stuff that's like not important. Here's the thing. I feel like I would let Dean Winchester see my social security number because he wouldn't remember it.
He canonically does steal people's identity.
That is true. But I don't think he would remember it unless he wrote it down. So that's the thing, is I feel like
I would let Dean Winchester look at my social security number.
I would. Look, I think
he does to run credit card scams.
Okay, yeah, but then I could be like, oh my god, Dean Winchester used me to run a credit card scam.
He's going through her stuff, and he finds an old picture of her dad, the sheriff, and he's with Peter, the guy who died 35 years ago. And Dean is like, oh, wait a minute, I think the sheriff Jake is also involved in Peter's death. And Peter's spirit is targeting both Bill and Jake's families. So Lucas, the kid, he leads them to a spot near the lake. And they like, I don't know how he knows. And they dig up the bicycle from the story. They dig up Peter's bicycle from the drawing.
So they find it like behind, and it's also like it's not very far from the house because Andrea and Lucas live with Jake, who's Lucas's grandpa and the sheriff.
Yeah.
So they are like
live together.
Yeah, because after Andrea's husband died, they were like, we should probably not live by ourselves anymore. But they find it like not far from the house. So they're like, well, this is pretty much confirmation that he had something to do with it.
And the sheriff, he appears and he literally holds the brothers at gunpoint. It's kind of a crazy episode because, like, usually, like, at the, climax part of the episode, there's, like, a monster that is, threatening them, whatever. And at this point, we were like, nope, they are being held at gunpoint by the sheriff.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, me and Bill, we buried the bike after we accidentally drowned Peter, and we did let his body sink into the lake.
And they're like, please. They were like, if you still had the body, we'd be able to salt it and burn it and get his spirit to leave. But let the body sink to the lake. So you guys need to leave and get out of town. And Jake is like, you guys are being ridiculous. Can you hear yourselves? Like, there's no spirit. It's all just an accident. How dare you say that? And then Andrea, Jake's daughter, walks out and she's like, Dad, is this true? And he's like, listen to them. They sound ridiculous. That's not true. And they're like, yeah, it is. You guys need to leave town as soon as possible.
Yeah, and
then
and then immediately the child Lucas gets like pulled into the lake.
Yeah. Well, they look over and they see him like walking towards the lake and like reaching his hand in, and they're like, stop, don't.
And so like Dean and Sam have to like jump in the lake after this kid. And they do not find him. And the grandfather, Jake, does jump into the lake, and he's treading water in the lake, and he's like, hi, ghost of Peter, I am so sorry. Please, like, take me instead of my grandson.
And then there's a part where we see, like, as the grandpa, like, decides to walk into the lake, there's a part where we see, like, the top of Peter's head just, like, peeking out of the water, and it's all, like, green and gross. Like, he's clearly, like, dead. And it's really scary. And then he goes under, and then Grandpa's like, I gotta go. And he walks and he's like, I'm so sorry. We were just kids. We didn't know. Lucas is just a little boy.
It's fucking horrible. And then, then he gets dragged under the water, and then Dean is able to, like, pull Lucas out. And then everybody's fine and whatever. And, like, they cut to, like, when Sam and Dean are, like, leaving the town. And Andrea and Lucas, they're saying goodbye to him, and they're like, we made you some sandwiches, and he's like, and the kid like starts talking to him and whatever, and Dean's like, oh, maybe I do like kids.
Yeah. Not Dean getting baby fever.
Literally, this does happen to him often in this show.
Yeah.
And then Andrea's like, thanks for saving us, and does give him a kiss on the cheek, and you're like, what is happening?
She gives him a kiss on the mouth.
Oh my god, I blocked it from my brain.
Her son is standing right there, and she's like, bye, Dean, and gives him a big kiss on the mouth right in front of Sam and her son.
Sam's like, I'm very uncomfortable with the energy we have in the studio today.
Yeah. And then Dean leans down to this child, and he's like, all right. So Sam goes to talk to Andrea really quick and be like, hey, like, are you okay? And Andrea's like, not, I guess, like, my dad, that's a lot to deal with, but like, I know he loved me and he loved Lucas, and you guys saved my son, so like, I'm really upset, but I'm gonna be okay. It's fine, thank you guys. And then you cut to Dean talking to Lucas, and he's like, all right, if you're gonna be talking now, remember this phrase I taught you. What is it? And the kids go, Zeppelin rules.
And you're like, this child is going to be bullied at school.
No, literally, I'm like, Dean, you're hurting this child actively.
Is this child like the same age as we are? Because like, how old is this kid in 2006?
Oh my god, you're right. Like, he was probably between like 10ish, maybe, I would say, in 2006.
All right, so I was in like the 6th grade. So I was like 11, 12. So this child is around the same, a little younger than me.
Yeah. Oh my god.
By the time, so like, I am imagining me at that time in elementary school saying Zeppelin rules and getting fucking bullied.
Oh my god. The idea of Dean being like, here you go, little buddy. Go get bullied. Go on, champ.
Hi, your dad and your grandpa just died, and you did watch it happen. Now you're gonna get bullied in school.
Yeah.
It is kind of an epic neurodivergent moment where he's like, oh my god, I must share the
I do love
hyperfixation with you.
Chronic info dumper Dean Winchester is very powerful to me, actually. That's actually means a lot. But so then they get in the car, they're like, goodbye, and they drive off into the sunset.
And you're like,
I don't think it's the
wow.
sunset. I think it's like the middle of the day.
Yeah, it is the middle of the, but it's literally, this episode is very much like, we have now established a pattern where Dean flirts with a woman, who may or may not kiss him on the mouth. Because I believe in the prior episode she kisses him on the cheek.
She does. So she kisses Dean on the cheek before she had gotten in the episode with the Wendy boy, before she had gotten into the ambulance to go with her brother. She had been like, thank you, goodbye, and gave him a kiss on the cheek.
And
once again, with Sam standing right there, like, where's my kiss?
Literally. It does, we will soon learn, when Sam's romantic exploits end in disaster all the time. So he's just like, all right, I'm done with this. So it's very funny for Sam is just the standing guy emoji, just standing there like,
I feel like Sam literally is just like, hey, anyway.
This episode is very, other than the weird heterosexuality at the end, it's very good, and it's very scary, and it's very sad, and it's very much a whodunit kind of thing. But it's also much like the last one. It's establishing some things that Supernatural will then build on a lot, which are, okay, if there's a vengeful spirit, we need to burn the body, or is the body accessible, or what's the other one of, like, okay, like, did this person have it, like, various questions, like, did this person have any enemies or do something that would mean that they would be targeting them or their loved ones? Like,
it's very procedural. Like, it's a really interesting mix of, like, procedural and, like, horror, because it really does give a lot of that, like, oh, it's like, we're gonna go do the research, and we're gonna go figure out, like, let's, by process of elimination, we're gonna figure out what the enemy is in this episode.
Yeah. Well, and in the research as well, I mean, they established this in the past 2 episodes as well, where they established, like, if there has been, like, regular killings over, like, regular periods of time, like, that indicates something, or they've all been in the same way or whatever. So, like, it's almost like holding your hand to be like, you can be a hunter too. Like,
yeah.
In every episode. I think that's why this show does make people feel crazy, because they're like, maybe I could do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's something that I love about stuff, is when it gives you the opportunity to figure out what is going on at the same time as the characters. I think there's a lot of shows that will have this issue, and a lot of stuff in general, where some character will know something, like, one of the POV characters will know something that you don't know, and as they're solving it, they'll be like, here's something I figured out while I was doing whatever. And it almost feels like unfair. But with this, it's like, all the information is there, and you're learning it at the same time as the POV characters. So you can theoretically solve the mystery at the same time as them. Or what's even better is, if you know what happens, you can rewatch it and be like, look, here's all the little hints, and here's how I could have figured it out.
Yeah. And later on in this series, Supernatural will, it'll feel like Whiplash, when they'll be like, this is very plot heavy and we're getting very big and whatever, and then they'll flip back to something, like, very formulaic like this, and you'll be like, whoa, but you have done it so many times that you're like, oh, it's probably a XYZ, and you're like, wow, I am so, look at me, I am, and then you're like, wow, this has created brain rot in my brain.
Yeah. I feel like that's the concept of Supernatural. This has created brain rot in my brain.
This has literally created brain rot. Oh, I forgot. They do mention the Loch Ness Monster and Lake Champlain in this episode, because they're like, maybe it's a monster in the lake, and, like, no, it's just, like, a sad child who died accidentally.
Yeah,
it's really awful.
I'm like, the Loch Ness Monster would never do this.
I will also say, something that the continuity section of the wiki brings up is that Dean mentions that he used to be fond of army men figurines. I love how they type this out. And in the season 5 finale swan song, which is said to be one of the best ones, and a lot of people say, oh, the show ended after that, I didn't keep watching. Swan song is a very classic episode. An army man figurine figures very heavily into it, so, you know, just a little Easter egg for everybody listening. Man, I just thought about the Swan Song episode and did sort of get a little
Oh my
choked
God.
up.
Well, that's what's nice. If you keep listening to the Mystery Spotcast, eventually we'll get there.
Eventually we'll get there in 3 years.
Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more from us, check out RuPaul's Pod Race, a queer Star Wars podcast. Wherever you get your podcasts, we are two of the hosts on that show, and it's very fun if you're into Star Wars. You can also follow us on social media at Mystery Spotcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Even if you don't use it as your podcatcher, it's really helpful. See you next Tuesday for more slaying people, queer baiting things, the supernatural business.